And this is one that's gotten a lot of attention in recent years because it was excluded, and yet, there's some very profound wisdom, right? Would
Oh,
you say that's
very profound. So, Gospel of Thomas, verse 1, Jesus said, "Whoever finds out what these sayings mean will not taste death,"
mm,
which always struck me as very fascinating because, especially the Catholic Church, but also sort of the church that I grew up in, was like, okay, you have to find Jesus. If you don't find Jesus, you can't talk to God. If you can't get with God, you're going to go to hell when you die. You're not allowed to
mm-hmm.
go to heaven. And,
Yep.
these contradictions come up that just don't make sense. So, let's also take a quick step back into what you were talking about, which was the creation of the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
So Jesus lived, a lot of people don't know this, but Jesus actually lived between was born between like somewhere between like 4 and 6 BC, and then lived until about 25-ish AD.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happened is over the next 200, 300 years, small sects of Christianity started to form around his teachings.
Yeah.
They, some of these had different gospels, different books that they agreed upon, some that they didn't agree upon. And what happened is that around like 325-ish AD,
Mm-hmm.
there started to form these councils, which would take some of the head priests from these individualized sects and say, okay, let's basically come together and create one solid formed organized religion around Jesus's teachings
Mm-hmm.
to display to the masses. And at this point, I think there's a bunch of different factors that go into play as to why they picked the gospels and things that they selected. There is some, how do I want to say it? Some criteria that they used that I had
Mm-hmm.
found, which were mainly four things. Number one was like it was written by one of Jesus's disciples or someone who knew or talked to them.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, it was written in the 1st century AD when Jesus lived or soon after he was crucified.
Mm-hmm.
Three was it was consistent with the other books that they believed were inspired by God. And four, accepted by most of the churches as valid or helpful for their faith. And something I found interesting, it's like the Gospel of Thomas really, in many ways, fills all of these requirements. You know, Thomas was one of Jesus's disciples.
Right.
Therefore, it had to have been written in the 1st century AD. And maybe where it's interesting and it gets interesting is when it talks about being consistent with other books,
Mm-hmm.
because this is where it starts to get a little fuzzy. Where I see that the Bible teaches is it focuses on the devotion aspect of God. So, in order to bring this in, we need to talk about this Indian mystic I've come across who's Paramahansa Yogananda. Have you heard of him
Mm-hmm.
before?
Oh yeah. Yes, of course.
So, Paramahansa, incredible guy. If your listeners haven't heard of him before, highly recommend the autobiography of a yogi.
Yep.
Completely changed my life. He has these 9 lesson plans, or I guess 18 lessons that he does over 9 months that you can do. And so I've been doing those. And one of the things that he talks about, which is the 10 manifestations of God. Now, what this means is that God can manifest because he's this all pervading, unseen energy force that lives beyond space and time. So the way that he manifests in our experience in our world are through these 10 ways, according to Paramahansa, which is light, sound, vibration, which is also known as the Holy Ghost, intelligence, love, peace, calmness, bliss, devotion, and the one that the Gospel of Thomas focuses on, which is wisdom. So, let's take this information now back to the Bible, where I believe that the aspect or manifestation of God that they were following was devotion. They were
Mm-hmm.
saying to themselves, does this passage invoke devotion to Jesus, to God,
Right.
or does it not? Now, whether or not there were some nefarious actors at plebe who saw devotion as a good way to seize control of people,
And then
uh,
the path to devote yourself is through me and my
it's a good way to
power.
challenge. Are you questioning me? Are you not
Yeah.
devoted
Right.
to what I'm saying?
Right. Right.
It's a good mode of control.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to say that was everybody, but I think when these big decisions happen, there have to be multiple factors that are taken into account.
Yeah.
And where this gets interesting is when it comes to wisdom. So what I see in the Gospel of Thomas, which is a Gnostic text, is wisdom. So Gnosticism, for your audience, you might already know this, is all based around the idea of gnosis. And gnosis is a Greek word which means knowledge or wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
So what the Gnostics believe is that you can obtain Christ-like abilities, you can become Christ, aligned with Christ consciousness through wisdom, through deeper understanding of the world, of the fabric of reality in which we live, and that will grant you liberation and salvation and freedom from hell, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of this kind of comes together and is what has created this reason that, in my opinion, the Gospel of Thomas was left out of the Bible